Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we're going to talk about regulation of potassium balance. So first of all, the introduction. Potassium is the second most abundant cation in the body after, of course, sodium, and the major cation in the ICF, the intracellular fluid compartment, because sodium is the major cation of the extracellular fluid compartment. Now, approximately 98% of the body potassium is contained within the body cells, as I told you that it is the major content of ICF, with an intracellular concentration of 140 to 150 milliequivalents per liter. And the potassium content of the ECF, the extracellular fluid, is about 3.5 to 5 milliequivalents, which is considerably lower. In adults, the total body potassium is approximately 50 milliequivalents per kg of the body weight. Okay, so as you can see in this picture, I have told you that potassium is mainly intracellular, that is about 98%, while only 2% is extracellular. And the potassium balance has the ability to maintain itself by exchanging between the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid. So it can exchange between these two and hence maintain the balance. So now we're going to talk about the gains and losses of potassium. Mainly the potassium intake is derived by dietary sources, and in healthy people, potassium balance usually can be maintained by a daily dietary intake of 50 to 100 milliequivalents. And the main losses occur through the kidneys. So approximately 80% to 90% of the potassium losses occur in the urine, with the remainder being lost in the stools. As you can see in this picture, if we take about 100 millimoles per day of potassium in our diet, in our GI tract, this is then reabsorbed into the body fluids, and hence after taking out all the mechanisms which are involved, which the potassium regulates, it is either secreted through the kidneys, which is the main source, about 90%. Is secreted through the kidneys, while the remainder of the 5% is secreted through the stools from the GI tract. Okay, now the mechanism of regulation. So ECF concentration of potassium is precisely regulated at about 4.2 milliequivalents per liter. Now you need to know that this is a very specific quantity that you have to remember, because even a simple change in this quantity or this amount can result in drastic changes. So the precise control is necessary because many cell functions are sensitive to even small changes in the ECF potassium levels. Now potassium is largely regulated through two mechanisms. The most important one is renal mechanisms that conserve or eliminate potassium. And the second one is a transcellular shift between the ICF and ECF compartments. So discussing about the renal regulation, as I told you that renal regulation is important because about 90% of the potassium is secreted by the kidneys. So here you can see the picture which shows the structure of the nephron. So this potassium is then filtered through the glomerulus, and here comes into the whole structure or the tubular structure of the nephron. Now 80% is reabsorbed in proximal tubules. So 80% of it is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, and the mechanisms involved underneath are, it is actually reabsorbed along with water, and hence a concentration gradient is made, hence it is absorbed in that manner. And it is indirectly sodium dependent. Along with sodium, it can also be reabsorbed. Okay, then the 10% is reabsorbed in ascending loop of Henle. So the next step where it is going to be reabsorbed is the ascending loop of, after coming here, it will be reabsorbed in the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle. And the mechanism involved underneath is sodium potassium 2Cl transport. All right, sodium, potassium and 2-chloride transport will help to reabsorb the 10% potassium in this loop of Henle. And then the excretory methods. So now the distal nephron, as you can see here, potassium excretion is regulated in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. So the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. Medullary collecting duct always reabsorbs. So this medullary collecting duct always reabsorbs the potassium, while the distal nephron here can reabsorb or secrete depending upon the dietary potassium. So when potassium plasma levels are increased, the potassium is secreted in the urine because we don't need more. So that's going to secrete into the urine from here. And if potassium levels are low, then we need to reabsorb it more. So, and this all, it's going to be reabsorbed, and this is reabsorbed by the potassium and hydrogen exchange mechanism. And hence, if in case of reabsorption, the potassium is reabsorbed and hydrogen ions are secreted in the filtrate, and hence that will result in the higher concentration or higher pH that will result in metabolic alkalosis. While in the other case where I told you that plasma levels were increased and the potassium is secreted, and hence the hydrogen ions are absorbed in return, and that will cause decrease in pH and hence metabolic acidosis. Okay, now aldosterone also has an important role in potassium secretion, and this effect of aldosterone on potassium elimination are actually mediated through a sodium-potassium exchange mechanism, which is located in the late distal and cortical collecting tubules of the kidney here. So how is it going to be done? Now, if the potassium levels are increased in the plasma due to increased intake or any other reason, what will happen? It will stimulate the adrenal cortex to release more aldosterone, which in turn absorbs more sodium and secretes more potassium. As already we have discussed the aldosterone mechanism in the sodium reabsorption. So in that case, increased aldosterone will help in increased secretion of the or excretion of the potassium, and hence regulate the potassium balance. While it is secreted, and again it will then in turn send a negative feedback that now we don't need more aldosterone secretion. So in turn the plasma levels will drop, and hence the aldosterone levels will also drop. So this is a mechanism that involves aldosterone. Okay, now extracellular and intracellular shifts. We talked about the renal regulation, and the second one I told you was extracellular and intracellular shifts. So to avoid an increase in extracellular potassium levels, excess potassium is temporarily shifted into the RBCs and other cells such as those of the muscle, liver, bone with the help of sodium-potassium ATPase pump. Because I told you that potassium is mainly found in the intracellular fluid, so we don't need excess of potassium in the extracellular fluid. So in case of increase in extracellular potassium, what happens is they are normally shifted into these other cells to maintain the normal levels of extracellular potassium. Okay, the factors that alter the intracellular extracellular distribution of potassium are, these are some of the factors that may alter these shifts: the serum osmolality, the acid-base disorders, the insulin or the catecholamines like epinephrine, beta adrenergic stimulation. So serum osmolality, how is it going to work? Acute increases in serum osmolality can cause water to leave the cell, and hence the loss of cell water produces an increase in the intracellular potassium, which is in turn going to cause potassium again to move out of the cell into the ECF. Now, in case of acid-base disorders, for example, in metabolic acidosis, the hydrogen ions move into the body cells for buffering, and hence they in turn cause potassium to leave and move into the ECF. And insulin and catecholamines like epinephrine, they actually increase the cellular uptake of potassium by increasing the activity of the sodium-potassium ATPase membrane pump. And in turn, they are going to increase the ICF ICF potassium levels. Okay, insulin produces an increase in cellular uptake of potassium after a meal, and the catecholamines particularly, which is epinephrine, facilitate the movement of potassium into muscle tissue during periods of the physiological stress. Now, beta-adrenergic stimulation, the drugs like pseudoephedrine and albuterol, which are actually beta-adrenergic agonists, have a similar effect on potassium distribution. And exercise also produces compartmental shifts in potassium. Repeated muscle contraction can release potassium into the ECF as well. Now, talking about disorders of potassium balance. So, potassium is critical to many body functions. All these mechanisms which I'll be discussing are actually regulated by potassium balance. So, the maintenance of the osmotic integrity of cells, number 1, the acid-base balance, number 2, number 3, the kidney's ability to concentrate urine, and number 4, conducting nerve impulses and the excitability of skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscles. So if there is a disorder in the potassium balance, either there is a hyperkalemia, that means the increased levels of potassium, or hypokalemia, which is the decreased levels of potassium. In either case, all these mechanisms can be disrupted. And most importantly, we are going to talk about the cardiac disruption, because this is the most crucial and the most serious one, which may lead to cardiac arrest or cardiac arrhythmias, which can also cause death. Okay, so the first one that we're going to discuss, the most important disorders are going to be enumerated as hypokalemia and hyperkalemia. So as the name indicates, hypo means less and kalemia means less potassium in blood. So hypokalemia refers to a decrease in plasma potassium levels below 3.5 milliequivalents per liter. All right. So here we're going to talk about the ECF levels, not the ICF levels. These are the ECF levels because of plasma levels. Okay. So now the causes and manifestations. So mainly we're going to talk about the causes first. There are 4 main causes. Of course, hypo means low levels. So how it will happen? Of course, if we do not have inadequate intake, number 1. Number 2, if there is excess renal losses, number 2. And then there is excess gastrointestinal losses, number 3, and transcompartmental shift, number 4. So in inadequate intake, it can be due to diet that is deficient in potassium, or there is inability to eat, or they can be due to administration of potassium-free parenteral solutions. Okay, now excess renal losses can be due to diuretic therapies, because they are actually secreting a lot of potassium, except potassium sparing diuretics, which actually spare potassium. Diuretic phase of renal failure, increased mineralocorticoid levels, for example aldosterone, because again in turn they are going to increase the secretion of potassium. Primary hyperaldosteronism, again this is the disorder in which there are increased amounts of aldosterone, so they're going to be more excretion of potassium. And excessive gastrointestinal losses can be either due to vomiting. Excess vomiting can result in excess potassium loss. Excess diarrhea can result in excess potassium loss. Gastrointestinal suction, draining gastrointestinal fistula. And the last one, transcompartmental shift, it can be either due to administration of beta-adrenergic agonists, as I told you, and administration of insulin for treatment of diabetic ketoacidosis and alkalosis or metabolic respiratory. It can be either metabolic or can be respiratory. So these things can shift the potassium from ECF to ICF, and in that case, of course, the ECF levels can fall below the level normal values, and hence they can cause hypokalemia. Okay, the manifestations are actually the signs and symptoms that are going to be appearing along with this hypokalemia. So the laboratory values, I told you, below 3.5 milliequivalents, the plasma levels should be below 3.5 milliequivalents, and then the inability to concentrate urine, which can be shown or which can be manifested as polyuria, excess urination, and polydipsia and excessive thirst. And GI manifestations can be like anorexia, nausea, vomiting, constipation, abdominal distension, paralytic ileus. Neuromuscular manifestations can be either muscle weakness, muscle fatigue, cramps, tenderness, paresthesias, weaknesses, and paralysis. And cardiovascular manifestations, these are most important ones: postural hypotension and increased sensitivity to digitalis toxicity, changes in ECG that I'll be discussing in the next slide, and cardiac dysrhythmia. This can be also very devastating. Then CNS manifestations: confusion and depression, acid-base disorders, which can either be metabolic alkalosis. Okay, so the ECG changes. First of all, we're going to discuss about the normal ECG. This is the normal ECG. As you know that there is a P wave, then there is a QRS complex, and then there is a T wave and a very slight U wave. So in case of hypokalemia, the P wave actually is normal, but there's going to be a PR interval prolongation. So this can be one thing. Then we have, this is the normal ST segment, but in case of hypokalemia, the ST segment can be depressed. As you can see here, that this is the normal line where it should be coming up, but it is below that line, so it is ST segment depression. And then the T wave is low, it's not of the normal amplitude, while the U wave is more prominent than the T wave in case of hypokalemia, and it's of more amplitude. In hyperkalemia, I'll be discussing afterwards. Now the treatment for hypokalemia, again we know that hypokalemia means low potassium, so we need to balance out and we need to add more potassium. So this can be done either by increasing the intake of foods that are high in potassium content, for example the meats, dried fruits, fruit juices, particularly orange juice and bananas, and oral potassium supplements can be prescribed, but this is only for those patients who have more losses than the intake. For example, the patients who are receiving diuretic therapies, so or those who are taking digitalis, so they need some oral potassium supplements as well. And then potassium may be given IV intravenously with when the oral route is not tolerated or when rapid replacement is needed. And along with this, it is necessary to consistently measure serum magnesium levels, because it has a correlation with it that if a person is having hypokalemia, he may be also having a magnesium deficiency, and this needs to be checked as well. And again, there should be a precaution taken while infusing potassium. This is very important, that the rapid infusion of a concentrated potassium solution can cause death from cardiac arrest. So hence the health personnel, whoever is administering IV solutions, need to be aware of this precaution pertaining to its dilution and the flow rate. Hyperkalemia, so as the name indicates, hyper means more and kalemia, potassium in the blood. Hyperkalemia refers to an increase in plasma levels of potassium in excess of 5 milliequivalents per liter, 5 or more than 5. The causes of hyperkalemia, there are mainly three causes: the excessive intake of potassium, release from intracellular compartment into the extracellular compartment, or inadequate elimination by kidneys. So excessive intake can be either excessive oral intake, or due to oral supplements, or due to rapid infusion of potassium containing parenteral fluids. Release from intracellular compartment can be due to either tissue trauma, burns, crushing injuries, extreme exercise, or seizures. And inadequate elimination by the kidneys can be due to either renal failure, adrenal insufficiency, or treatment with potassium sparing diuretics, treatment with ACE inhibitors or ARBs. The manifestations, firstly laboratory values, serum potassium level above 5 milliequivalents. Then gastrointestinal manifestations may have nausea, vomiting, intestinal cramps, or diarrhea. And neuromuscular manifestations may include paresthesias, weaknesses, dizziness, muscle cramps. And CVS manifestations, changes in ECG and risk of cardiac arrest with severe excess. So ECG changes in hyperkalemia are mainly, the most important one is peaked T wave, and widening of QRS complex here, and PR interval prolongation, and long P wave. So these are the four things that occur in hyperkalemic changes. Now, the diagnosis can be made by complete history, which is asked from the patient, which includes questions about dietary intake, use of potassium sparing diuretics, history of kidney disease, or any recurrent episodes of muscle weakness. Then comes the physical examination, which needs to detect any signs, for example, muscle weakness or signs of volume depletion or any other signs included here. And then plasma potassium levels, again, that should be above 5 milliequivalents per liter, and ECG changes, as again I told you before. Now, the treatment options, the treatment of potassium excess or hyperkalemia varies with the degree of increase in the plasma potassium and whether there are ECG and neuromuscular manifestations. So one option is that calcium is used. Calcium actually antagonizes the potassium-induced decrease in membrane excitability, and that restores excitability towards normal. This effect of calcium administration is usually short-lived, which is only about 15 to 30 minutes. So we need to accompany some other therapies as well along with calcium to decrease the ECF potassium concentration. Another treatment option can be administration of the sodium bicarbonate, beta adrenergic agonists, for example albuterol, or insulin. These three are going to distribute or shift the potassium from ECF into the ICF, intracellular compartment, and hence they're going to decrease the ECF concentration. For example, intravenous infusions of insulin and glucose are often used for this purpose. Now, the less emergent measures that focus on decreasing intake or absorption, and second one is increasing renal excretion or cellular uptake. Decreased intake can be of course achieved by restricting the dietary sources of potassium, and increasing potassium output often is more difficult, and people with renal failure may require hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis to reduce plasma potassium levels. Sodium polystyrene sulfonate, this is a cation exchange resin which can also be used to remove potassium ions from the colon. So that was all about potassium regulation and the abnormalities. Thank you.